Hello, welcome to our class. Today we are going to look at poetry, specifically poetry analysis. We are going to look at the structuralism approach. As you know that there may be different approaches to poetry analysis. So this structuralism approach analysis basically considers the structure and language of a poem. It ignores the poet's life and influence on the poem. It also emphasizes on the language only, not on the author or the reader's emotions and feelings. Therefore, it is an independent text-based analysis. Then maybe you're wondering on the proponents of the theory. Structuralism owes the greater part of its insights to the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. He argued that language is a system of science, and from this science, this is where we get the basic meaning. As a result, meaning is not found by tracing the development of sources or the changing, but on language. Right, may I take you to the tenets? The main tenets are as follows. Structuralism focuses on the current structural properties of a text. Thus, it considers the way in which literature draws attention to the nature and specific properties of language. You can see that the language aspect is coming back all the time because this is the area of focus. Structuralist critics argue that the structure of language, not the writer, produces reality. So the world view of a structuralist analytic is on the language. Therefore, the source of meaning is not the writer or the reader's experiences, but the language. When we are analyzing a poem using the structuralist approach, there are areas of concentration. And the first area of concentration is the poem heading. When you are given a poem, consider the meaning of the poem heading. You need to ask yourself to find out, does it have a denotative meaning? That is the literal meaning. Or it has got a connotative meaning. A connotative meaning, it's a metaphoric meaning, or we can say a hidden meaning. Then you move on to the message. Think of what the poem is all about. In fact, what you need to do, you need to read a poem for the first time. You read it for the second time, slowly this time, and you read it for the third time, focusing on the meaning. In order for you to get the meaning of the poem, you need to ask yourself, what motivated the poet to write the poem? And who were the intended readers of this poem. Then from there you can also find the themes, and you write on these areas. So they are basically two: the meaning and the themes. Then after that you move on to diction. You needed to find out how language, choice of words has been done by the poet, because poets are crafty people. They don't take any word, but they carefully choose their words for their effects. This is mainly because a poem is judged by, of course, among all other things, its diction. So this means that appropriate diction conveys the message much better than any other diction which is haphazardly chosen. You also need to consider the poetry type. There are different types of poems. So when you receive a poem that you need to analyze, consider, is it a narrative poem? That is a poem that tells a story. Or is a dramatic poem a poem which tells its story using a speech of a character? Or is it a closet, which is a play in a poem form, of course, which is meant to be read and said? You can even try to find out, is it a lyric? Lyrics, I'm sure it's a common term to you. It goes with the singing, the lyrics of a poem, especially those that are sung. Then we have another type, the panegyric. That is a poem that praises a person, an event, an object, or the like. And then maybe you can also think of an ode. Is this poem addressed to somebody? And you also need to find out, is this poem expressing grief, or is it a mournful poem associated with death? If it is like that, it is a dirge. As a result, you need to have prior knowledge of the types of poems before you actually sit down to analyze one. There are also other types of poems according to their form. The common ones, you have heard of the sonnet. I'm sure when I'm talking of a sonnet, you think of the Shakespearean sonnet. This is the common one with 14 lines, and these lines, they do rhyme. And then, in fact, for the Shakespearean sonnet, the first 12 lines are divided into 3 stanzas of 4 lines each. Then we've got 2 lines. And maybe some people were not aware that we also have what is known as the Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarchan was an Italian. So it is either the Petrarchan sonnet or the Italian sonnet. And for this one, it is divided into 2 stanzas. The first stanza being an octave, and then a sestet. We also have another type, the ballad, which is a narrative poem, and it is also meant to be sung, and it tells a dramatic story. And what you also need to know about ballads is that they have strong rhythm and rhymes. And this is why, of course, I have said that it is meant to be sung. There is the Italy, which is a short poem, normally expressing a peaceful and happy scene. An Italy can be just 5 lines, one stanza, 5 lines or so. It's usually short. Then let's move on to the structure. You also need to consider the structure when you are doing the analysis. When we are talking of the structure, we are concerned with the arrangements of lines in a poem. Remember, some poems are divided into stanzas, and the majority of them maybe falls under this category. And then we have some, like the sonnets that I've talked about, they don't have stanzas, right? Then it's not just enough to indicate whether a poem is in stanzaic form or not, but you need to go on further to analyze the type of stanzas. That means if it has got stanzas, right, maybe someone is wondering what a stanza is. We are talking of the group of lines in a poem. Remember, the poetic language is different from the prose language. For prose, we talk of a paragraph, but for a poem, we talk of a stanza. For prose, we talk of sentences, but for a poem, we talk of lines. So this is what we are talking of. A group of lines in a poem is a stanza. And then normally the stanzas have a definite pattern. You can even consider the shape of the stanza, because some of them, they actually form a shape. Then you also need to consider the number of lines, because there are stanzas can be named according to the number of lines. For instance, where we have a stanza of 2 lines, it is known as a couplet. Then a stanza of 3 lines is a tercet. Then remember, the quart refers to 4. So for 4 lines, it's a quatrain. Then 5 lines, a sequain. Then 6, it's a se. So it's sestet. And then the 7 is a heptastige. And the 8, the oct, the octave. Right, then we come on to the tone. It's another area of analysis. Then the tone is brought out by the language that is used by a poet. And we can say that the tone of a poem is the poet's attitude towards the subject of the poem. That is, the poem can see beauty and describes beauty, anger and describes anger. As a result, the tone takes that aspect, that attitude of the poet. In other words, we can say the tone is the inner voice which sends the feelings of the poet and persona to the reader. The terms that you can use when you are analyzing a poem, they are sarcasm, if there is anything sarcastic, if the tone is indicating some sarcastic aspects, then you can talk of sorrow, you can talk of joyous. Then we move on to mood, and you should take note that mood is created by tone. So the mood refers to the emotional feeling that a poet creates in a poem. You can think of terms that you can use to describe mood. And remember, I've said that mood is related to tone. Then we move on to imagery. Imagery can produce mental pictures in the reader. So we are talking of that diction which is used by the poet, which is powerful and appropriate, which when the reader is reading can actually have some senses of what is actually being said. For example, we can have a description that appeals to the sight. So that will be the visual imagery. Then we can have another one appealing to the hearing, then to smell, to touch, and the aspects. All right, then another aspect which is very important for poems is the rhyme. Rhyme is a special repetition of similar sounds in different words. So you can find rhymes in a sentence, in a line. You can find rhyme in a stanza. It can be within the stanza, at the end of the stanza, and so on. And these rhymes have got their names. The first one that you are seeing here is a perfect rhyme. The consonants preceding the rhyming a vowel sound must be different, as in corn and bone. Then there is the internal rhyme. We have got these rhyming words that are in the middle of a line of a poem. Then there is the end rhyme. These are rhyming words at the end of line. Then we have the I rhyme. The I rhyme actually, it's a bit unique. It's actually a false rhyme. Words that appears as though they rhyme, yet they are not. For example, you've got a pan and a can. So when you see an and for a pan and then an for a can, you think that they rhyme, yet they don't. Then we have got the masculine rhyme. This is rhyme made up of single stressed syllable, like word, work. Then we've got the feminine rhyme. This is rhyme consists of the two syllables, one stressed followed by an unstressed one, like anting and panting. Then we have the alternate rhyme. As the word alternate, it means that the first line of a poem, it rhymes. Then it rhymes with the third one in that manner. So it's number 1 rhyming with number 3, and then number 2 rhyming with number 4, alternating the alternate rhyme. Then after analyzing all those aspects that I've talked of, you need to analyze the poetic devices. Some authors have written them as figures of speech. These are expressions that are used by poets when creating poems. They arouse the reader's feelings, and these include the following. We have got the similes. When you are comparing two things, you can imagine comparing your lady to an angel. We have anaphora, we have enjambment. The list goes on and on and on and on. We are going to look into details these poetic devices next time. Thank you.